The vast emptiness of space surrounds you and your small ship. There is nothing but the cold, deafening quiet of the outside, and the only thing illuminating the endless pitch-black void before you are faraway stars scattered across your view. You don't know where you are, how you got there, or even your own name for that matter. Yet somehow, the entire fate of the human race rests on your shoulders alone. This is the premise of Andy Weir's hard sci-fi novel Project Hail Mary, and that is about as much information as I'm willing to give you. That's because this novel is best experienced if you go into it completely blind, as it forces you to be put in the main character's shoes. Each revelation and mystery is made that much more impactful, so if you haven't yet read the book, I highly recommend that you do. Project Hail Mary is unlike any book I've ever read. It's endlessly captivating and, above all else, surprisingly hopeful despite its grim premise. It's a story that has stuck with me for a multitude of reasons, and I want to go into why. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, the meat and potatoes, dare I say, let me just give you a brief rundown of the events of the book, in case it's been a while since you read it or you just need a bit of a refresher. If not, though, you can always just skip straight to the review, but I'd encourage you to stick around for this part, because it was pretty fun to make. Really quickly before this starts, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Chronically Online series on YouTube by Nicole Raffi, because her videos inspired this section. So definitely check out her series. It's really funny. But yeah, with that being said, enjoy this section. Okay, so this was a lot better in my head. Now that I see it in front of me, it looks a little weird, but that's okay. We're just gonna go with it. So we're gonna try to kind of speed run through this because I don't want this video to be longer than it already is, and also because my phone is like very much almost out of storage, so just bear with me. I'm gonna try to explain everything as fast as I can. First things first, we have our main character, Rylan Grace. In the book, we just kind of referred to him as Grace. You can just kind of forget about his first name. So we have Rylan Grace, which interestingly enough is actually being played by Ryan Gosling. And I don't know, I mean, it's kind of interesting that like their names are pretty similar. There's really nothing much to it. It's just, I just thought it was a cool fun fact. But anyways, so we start out with our main character, Rylan Grace, right? So he wakes up in the middle of space, right? In the ship. He doesn't know where he is at first. He doesn't know why he's there. He doesn't know his name. He doesn't know anything. The only thing he knows is that he is alive in this space, but his two, what are they called again? Astronauts. These two astronauts are with him, but they are very much not alive, right? They've been dead for a while. So we see through the series of flashbacks that Grace was actually a molecular biologist, right? He was an academic scientist and he wrote a thesis. I think it was like a thesis or paper or something. I don't know. I'm not like in the scientific world, obviously, as you can tell by this. So anyways, he writes this thesis that basically argues that life can theoretically exist without water, right? People disagree with this. He kind of gets clowned on. I'm going to be honest. He gets clowned on for this paper and he can't really handle the criticism, or he doesn't like the criticism he's receiving, so he ends up leaving the academic world to become a teacher, a science teacher to, I think, middle schoolers or elementary schoolers, something along those lines. This is kind of a side tangent. So a lot of characters kind of like look down on him, and you see this in the book. They kind of look down on him because he has like this like huge, he has this whole PhD, but he's choosing to be like a grade school teacher, right? But like, God forbid my boy Grace finds something he's passionate about, right? Like, I don't know why they judge him for this, even though he's like the happiest that we see him in the book, aside from when he's with Rocky, is when he's a teacher. So I don't really see why like it's a bad thing for him to be a teacher, but whatever. Anyways, so one day, regular day on Earth, they discover that there is a red line. Pretend that this is red. A red line near the sun, right? This is eventually named the Petrova line. So we got this Petrova line, and this line it's all fun and games, ignore that. It's all fun and games until they see that the sun is actually losing its heat slowly. Actually, not slowly, rapidly. It's losing its heat at a rapid pace, which is like really bad, because this can cause like ice ages, or a singular ice age, whatever, famines, all these things, and eventually it will cause the entire extinction of Earth, right? Like all the life on Earth will die. This is really bad, right? So we then meet this really cool, mysterious baddie, one of my favorite characters in this book, aside from Grace, honestly. But yeah, so anyways, we meet Strat, Ava Strat. You can kind of forget about her first name. We don't really hear her first name like ever again. So she actually goes up to Grace, and because of the paper that he wrote about like water and like life and all that stuff, so because of that paper that everyone hated, she goes up to him and she's like, hey man, we need you to study why this is happening. Specifically, we need you to study this thing, right? This thing right here. You might be wondering, what is this thing right here? That's a great question. This thing right here is an alien, right? It doesn't really look like one, but it's an alien life form. It's a microscopic alien life form that is traveling from the sun And I think Grace is someone who discovers why it's traveling. We'll get to that point. It's traveling from the sun, taking the heat from the sun, going to Venus, and reproducing, right? And then it's just like going back and forth, which is causing this red line. Obviously really bad. So he is very reluctantly, extremely reluctantly, he does not want to be involved in this at all, is recruited to study this thing, right? So he makes a lot of discoveries. He makes a lot of like really cool discoveries about like, I don't know, a bunch of stuff. We don't have time for that. Read the book, it's really good. And he eventually names this thing astrophage. So from now on, this is astrophage. So astrophage, as we've discussed, is essentially, this is really stupid, is essentially sucking the life out of Earth for its heat to go to Venus and reproduce. Now, it's important to know this because it's not only doing this to our sun, it's doing this to every star in all the galaxies, except for one star named, I'm gonna mispronounce this, Tosheti, except for the Tosheti star system. And they want to find out why this is going on. Like, why is this star seemingly untouchable? So this is when our beloved favorite diva Strat, she wants to recruit Grace to join the Hail Mary project. Ooh, the name of the book. Anyways, so she wants, basically this Hail Mary project is where they're going to send out, let me get this other guy. They're going to send out 3 astronauts into space. They're going to send these 3 You know, it's actually kind of funny because that's foreshadowing what happens. So they're going to send these 3 astronauts on this ship named the Hail Mary. They're going to send them all the way to this star, this Tosheti star system, and they're going to try to find out why this star isn't dying, right? So you might be asking yourself, where exactly is this star? Because it's a real star. It's a real star system, fun fact. It is a whole 12 light years away. So basically, the Earth is cooked because there's like literally no way that, you know, we can get from here all the way to here in like the, I think like 20-year time frame that the Earth is given to survive or estimated to survive. However, one of the discoveries that Grace makes, or somebody makes, is that astrophage is a really great fuel. It's a really great renewable fuel source, right? And it's really fast and extremely powerful. So it will be able to get this ship to this destination in like a matter of like 3 years relative to the ship, right? So it is possible, right? It is possible. However, they do not have enough time to breed enough astrophage for a return trip. So these 3 astronauts that they're going to send out to space will not be returning. It's very important to know this. Keep in mind, Grace does not want to be one of these astronauts, okay? He makes it very clear he does not want to volunteer. So they find these 3 astronauts, and these 3 astronauts are very specific. So not only do they have to be very qualified in whatever science it is that they're required to know, but they had to have a specific gene that allows them to survive a 3-year coma, right? So it's already a really tiny pool of like people that they can choose from. And also every single one of these 3 people, they have backup scientists who are at the ready in case anything happens to them and they're not able to go. Grace does not volunteer. He does not volunteer for this. He's just there to help out. So they have this whole plan all together, right? They have these 3 astronauts. They're pretty cool. So 3 days before the Hail Mary ship is set to sail, there's actually an explosion. There's like an accidental explosion because of astrophage. Because remember, astrophage is like really like powerful, right? So there's an explosion that ends up killing this astronaut and his backup, right? So this astronaut is dead. Excuse me. So this astronaut is dead, right? So there's only 2 astronauts and they need a 3rd astronaut desperately because they are only 3 days from leaving, right? And again, Earth is cooked. We need to go. So this is when Strat actually reveals to Grace that this entire time that he has been helping them out, he has actually been he's kind of been training to become the 3rd backup, the backup for the one that died, right? It's because he knows everything. Like he knows everything that he would need to know. There is technically a fourth. There is technically a 4th backup behind Grace, but with only 3 days, like realistically, there's like literally no time to train them. Like how are you going to train them and everything they need to know? So Grace is the only like plausible, real like other astronaut that there could be, and he does have the gene. She told him that he did not have the gene, right? Because she knew that he would be like, I'm not going to be a part of this. But he does have the coma gene, right? So she gathers everyone up. She gathers a whole team, says like, hey man, you have a day to decide. We're going to respect your decision, but just know this is a huge decision that you need to make. So the day comes around. He meets privately with Strat, and he says, you know, despite how terrified he is, he says that he will not be joining the Project Hail Mary ship. So you're kind of wondering at this point, like, he says that he's not going to join, right? How is it that he, like, you know, like, make it make sense. How does he go from here to there, right? If he says he doesn't want to join. The thing is, right, I love Strat. She's such a cool character. I cannot defend her in this sense. She says she's not taking no for an answer. So she tells him that she is going to drug him and force him to go on the ship against his will, completely against his will, right? She's going to drug him the night before so that he can't go tell everyone, hey man, she's forcing me to get on the ship. Not only that, okay, it gets worse. Not only that, she's going to drug him again with a memory loss inducing drug. So that will, like, his memory will eventually come back to him gradually when he's on the ship, right? But when he wakes up on the ship, he's not going to remember anything. He's not going to remember that he was forced on the ship. And she just kind of expects, like, these other astronauts to kind of catch him up and all that stuff. That is diabolical, right? Like, so that is how he ends up on the ship. So fast forwarding to the actual events of the book, this is like before he figures this all out. So he's in space. I think at this point he's remembered that, like, what astrophagia is. He knows what he needs to do. And then randomly, like literally randomly, a fourth of the way into the book, he meets an alien, okay? He's approached by an alien, and not just any alien. An alien that he names, Rocky. Because Rocky is, like, completely different from what you would expect, like a typical, like, alien to be, I guess. Like, you know, he's not green. He very much resembles a rock with legs. He kind of looks like a spider, low-key. He doesn't have a mouth. He doesn't have eyes. He communicates, like, through, like, these, like, vocal cords. It's pretty cool. I'm not gonna go into too much detail, but it's really creative and really cool. So anyways, we find out that Rocky is actually in the same situation as Earth, right? Like, he's also there to try to find a way to save his planet because he comes from the Eridani system. So his planet is arid. You know, so they're there for the same reason. And throughout the book, they become, like, they team up and they become, like, really good friends. Like, honestly, like, I would argue, like, their friendship is the best part of the book. So the thing is that Rocky's spaceship is made out of something called xenonite. So if you paid attention in your high school chemistry class, xenon, right, is an element, it's a gas. So somehow the Iridians figured out how to make xenon into a solid, into a very, very strong solid. And this solid is, like, his ship is entirely made up of xenon, okay? And it's like this, like, clear type of metal. So he actually goes into the Hail Mary ship and he, like kind of, like, makes, like, tunnels out of xenon in this ship so that they can live together, work together, all that stuff. So a bunch of stuff happens in the story. They grow, like in a really close friendship. They eventually travel to, like, the star that they're going to, and they figure out why it isn't dying. It is not dying because there's this other alien life form near this. For some reason, I imagined it as, like, an axolotl. I don't know why. I don't know why. So this alien species that he, for some reason, names Tomiba, it eats astrophage, okay? So this thing, it eats astrophage, and it stops it from getting to this star, which is why the star is not dying. So they devise a plan. They capture some of this stuff. They almost die trying to get it. It's actually a really emotional scene. And eventually they start working towards breeding this Tomiba, this axolotl, so that it can survive in their respective planets, so that they can, you know, like, survive. They can use it for their respective suns and their stars. They get that stuff done, and they unfortunately have to part ways. I didn't mention. So Rocky, his planet was able to breed, like, a lot of astrophage easily because of the heat. So he has a bunch of extra astrophage. So he actually gives this astrophage to the Hail Mary ship, meaning that Grace will be able to have enough astrophage to travel all the way back to Earth and survive, okay? So we're happy. We're all happy. They go their separate ways. He goes to his ship. He goes to their ship. And they're off, right? They're off. So as they're going off, there's still a couple pages left in the book. You're like, wait, what's going on? Why do we have so many pages left? So he discovers that Tomiba can actually pass through xenonite. So, because they make, like, these little, like, xenonite these xenonite, like, tanks to put them in. But these things can easily pass through it, right? So and this is really bad because if you remember, these things eat astrophage. So once it passes through his ship, it kind of eats some of his fuel, but he's able to contain this, right? But then he remembers, wait, Rocky's kind of cooked. Like, he's a goner because his entire ship is made of xenonite, which means that his entire ship is compromised. He has no fuel and he is stranded. Why am I getting so passionate about this? He is stranded in the middle of space with nowhere to go. And he still needs to go to his planet, but he can't go to his planet. Okay, so at this point, the Hail Mary ship has already sent all this information to Earth. So Earth is fine. The sun is going to be fine, right? But Arid does not have this information. So he has to make a decision. Grace has to decide whether he should just, like, save himself and go to Earth, or if he should go find Rocky stranded in the middle of space and take him back to his planet. Because the thing is that, yes, he does have more extra fuel that Rocky gave him, but the Hail Mary ship only has enough food for him to go back to Earth, but he's not going to survive the trip back to Rocky. So he takes some time to decide, and knowing the kind of person he is, he chooses to go save Rocky. Right? So they reunite in an emotional scene that you're lying if you didn't cry to. You know, he tells him that he's going to take him to his planet. I don't have a visual for Arid, I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna say this is Arid. So he's gonna take him back to Arid. And you know, he explains like, you know, like I'm not gonna make it. I'm not gonna make it. I only have enough to take you home, right? Because he can't eat Iridian food because Iridian food has a lot of toxins that would kill him. We kind of come to terms that this is how the story is gonna end. However, Rocky, like, randomly gets the bright idea. He's like, why don't you just try eating Tomiba? And he's like, wait, hold on. So we get a fast forward to 16 years later where both Grace, we're gonna pretend this is Arid, where both Grace and Rocky are alive on Arid, right? The Iridians are like super happy that he sacrificed himself to save them. They give him a lot of accommodations. He's living in this like xenonite like dome that has like oxygen and, you know, like has like his atmosphere and all that stuff. So he's living. And, you know, we find out that Rocky explains to him, and they're both like fluent in each other's languages at this point. He explains to Grace that 16 years after all of this happened, they have studied and they found that the sun, the Earth's sun, has actually regained its previous energy, meaning that all of this whole thing was a success. So, you know, he's pretty tearful and they part ways temporarily, and he goes to his little house, and we find out in the last couple pages that Grace has become a science teacher to Iridian children. Just kind of going back to what made him so happy in the first place, why he even joined all of this in the first place. And yeah, with that, Project Hail Mary ends. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Sorry, this was kind of rushed. I have like no space left on my phone, so I'm like trying to get through this really quickly. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. If you haven't read the book, you just kind of got everything spoiled, but I still highly recommend you read the book and watch the movie. So yeah, back to the review. Maybe it was because this was my first time reading a sci-fi novel, but this entire story felt unlike anything I had ever read before, and that made it practically impossible for me to put down. And I'm not just saying that to be dramatic, I mean that in a literal sense. Anytime I picked up this book, it became physically challenging for me to put it down. I was so deeply lost in its world that hours would pass me by while I read it, and I wouldn't even notice. I have this one specific memory of reading Project Hail Mary late into the night. It was well past 1 a.m. at this point, and I just remember being so exhausted, like my body was literally begging me to just call it a night, but I could not put the book down, because every time I tried to, my mind would inevitably wander back to the pages that I had just read, and I felt this eagerness to go back and find out what was going to happen next. And by the way, the only reason I did end up going to sleep that night was because my brain was so tired and deep fried that I literally could not comprehend what I was reading. Like, at one point, I read the main character's name, and I just like sat there for a good 3 seconds trying to remember who that name even belonged to. I lost track of the amount of times that I stayed up late into the hours of the night to just read one more chapter because of how addicting this book was. It's so special when a story is able to immerse you with its writing this way, when it makes you lose the concept of time itself because of how deeply invested you are. I was excited every time I thought about returning to the book's pages because I knew that a deeply immersive world was waiting for me. The author creates this perfect, captivating world that you can't help but get lost in the most mesmerizing way. This feeling of complete immersion is what makes readers love reading. It's what we look for and what we hope to find in each story we pick up, and Project Hail Mary does not disappoint. This story, as we discussed in detail above, follows an astronaut who is forced to face the harsh and borderline hopeless realities of his situation. Naturally, you'd expect the story to be bleak, gritty, a story that reflects its dark plot with a main character who struggles to come to terms with the situation. At the very least, that's what I was expecting, going into it basically completely blind, yet what you actually get is the complete opposite. This story was, to my surprise, heartwarming and hopeful, showing you just how indestructible the human will is and, above all else, what something so simple as optimism can do. I feel like we're so often used to following main characters who are serious, cold, maybe with a little bit of brooding sprinkled here and there to add some more flair. It's something that goes hand in hand with plots of a serious nature such as this one, at least in my experience. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing by any means, it's just something that I at least have come to expect. That's why going into this book blind with no indication of the tone results in you being hit with this sort of whiplash in a way, because the main character of the story couldn't be farther from what you'd expect him to be, and that made the book that much more exciting. It felt like uncharted territory almost, because from the moment you hit the first page, your expectations are thrown out the window. Grace is clumsy, charismatically dorky, and driven by a strong sense of empathy that you don't often see in male main characters. There's a specific line in the book that stuck out to me when I first read it, and it really encompasses who Grace is as a person. In fact, it's actually kind of what inspired this whole video in the first place. The line takes place right after the Adrian incident. You know, the one where the ship spins out of control and both Rocky and Grace literally almost cease to exist. Anyway, after Rocky saves Grace's life, he loses consciousness, but he tells Grace to leave him be and try to save their planets. Grace knows that the logical thing to do, while Rocky is in his comatose, unresponsive state, is to focus on the mission. He shouldn't waste his precious and frankly limited time on trying to revive someone who, for all he knows, could already be gone. Yet he goes against this logic and thinks to himself, maybe I'm being emotional instead of rational, but so what? That line took me back for a second, and I thought to myself, yeah, he's right, so what? I mean, technically he ends up injuring Rocky after this, but it's the thought that counts. Grace's biggest strength lies in his empathy. It's this trait of his that we see rewarded over and over again in the story. He cares deeply about others, and this drives him to make the decisions that ultimately end up saving his and Rocky's planets. Think about what drove him to join the Hail Mary project in the first place. It wasn't because of the glory and recognition that he'd receive for being a hero, or because he felt this strong sense of duty to save Earth. He was actually about ready to just wipe his hands clean of the whole thing when Strat no longer needed his help, but what kept them from leaving were his students. More specifically, the idea of creating a better future for the lives of the students he cared so much about is what led him to officially join the organization. Grace's friendliness and welcoming attitude is what allowed him to grow a deep friendship with a literal space spider whose language and biology couldn't be further from his own. A friendship whose teamwork and dedication ends up solving the astrophage problem. In the end, his kindness is the only reason that he's able to survive. Grace is met with one final decision towards the end of the book. He can either return to Earth and live, or he can save his friend who is stranded in space, which would save his planet in turn, but basically doom him. Grace could have easily prioritized his own safety in this situation. I mean, who wouldn't? It's a terrifying decision having to choose between your own life and that of another. But he went against everything he knew he was supposed to do in order to sacrifice himself and save not only his best friend, but his planet as well. A planet that he had never even been to or seen, mind you. All because he listened to that emotional side of him that told him it was the right thing to do. And it's this huge sacrifice that results in the Iridians being so grateful that they end up helping him survive on their planet. It felt like such a breath of fresh air to read a story that was driven by a character whose greatest strength lay in their emotions. I didn't realize how much I needed this fresh perspective until I finished this book. And it's not just its main character that left a lasting impact on me, the entire book itself. It's written in this endlessly hopeful tone, and every event in the book shows you just how strong humanity can be when it's pushed to its limits, something that becomes clear to us during the book's epilogue. The finale of this book was a bit shocking. It admittedly took me a while to decide if it was even a good or a bad ending, but after a while, I think it was meant to be good. Grace ends up surviving and living on Arid thanks to the kindness of the Iridians, but his situation is far from ideal at first glance. Arid is nothing like Earth. It's devoid of any sunlight, making the entire planet dark and difficult to navigate with human eyes. There are no humans that he can connect with, no fruits, vegetables, or any plant life for that matter, and worst of all, the intense atmosphere has caused Grace's bones to corrode over the years, which results in him having to rely on a cane to walk around at the age of 40. He can never return to his planet, and even if he did, the chances of anyone he knew back then being alive by the time he would arrive are basically slim to none. He is forced to live in an isolated bubble that no Iridian can enter and that he cannot leave, as it risks certain death. The only way he can communicate with others is through thick glass made of xenonite. Even if he tried, he can never return to the way things were before. This ending could have easily been seen as a tragedy, but this is not that kind of book, and Grace is not that kind of person. He doesn't focus on the fact that he's the only human alive for, I don't know, like light years. He focuses instead on the kindness of the Iridians who stopped at nothing to help him find a way to live on their planet. Something that they're still fine-tuning even 16 years later, as he happily notes that they're still working on replicating more Earth food for him to enjoy. Even though the planet is completely dark, Grace notes that he's grateful that he can see with the use of his artificial light in his dome, because unlike the Iridians who don't have eyes, he's able to appreciate and see the beauty of the unique colorful rocks that are scattered all over the ground, ones that he had never seen before on Earth. He couldn't be bothered with being stuck in a bubble for the rest of his life, because why would he, when he is able to communicate daily with his best friend Rocky through the glass? Someone who Grace warmly admits is the best friend he's ever had. Best of all, though, is that in the final pages of the book, it's revealed that Grace has once again found meaning in life. Once a teacher on Earth, he now gets to be a science teacher to Iridian children, paralleling the career that once made him so happy. And by the way, I just want to say that you're lying if you didn't at the very least tear up when you read that part. I mean, me personally, I might have been like sobbing, but that's not important. Not all characters, however, had the benefit of being able to look at the brighter side of things. While the story is optimistic in nature, it doesn't ignore the fact that difficult, borderline immoral decisions had to be made for the sake of humanity. No one shows this better than Strat, one of the most compelling characters to come out of the story and someone who couldn't be any more different than our main character. Strat was given this immense amount of power. She was quite literally above the law, which allowed her to get away with anything and everything that was deemed necessary to her mission. That much amount of raw power could and very likely would corrupt just about anyone. But the interesting thing about her was that despite her near infinite amount of influence, she never allowed herself to take advantage of it for her own personal gain. Every single one of her decisions was to further the goal of saving humanity, even if it meant that she herself would be harmed in the process. In fact, she even tells us this herself when she explains in a very tactical and detached manner that after the Hail Mary project is over, she will most likely be jailed for the rest of her life because of the orders that she sent out. Here, we have a character that couldn't be further from in touch with her emotions. Strat and Grace are drastically different, both in their personalities and in their outlooks on life. One is optimistic and emotional, while the other is pessimistic and logical. It's this pessimism that allows Strat to make the tough decisions. She has to take the worst case scenarios into account to decide if the ends of her decisions justify the means. Strat and Grace's personality differences make for some of the best back and forth banter in the book, but it also highlights how drastically different one's outcome on life can be depending on how they view the world. At the same time, however, it also shows us the benefits and drawbacks of each. Because as much as I'd love to say that we should all be like Grace, it's important to understand the importance of Strat's viewpoint. Ultimately, tough decisions had to be made. Someone needed to detach themselves from the morality of their actions in order to save the entirety of humanity. As much as I loved Grace's emotionally driven personality, it did lead him to run away from his fears over and over again, something that Strat actually calls him out on during one of their final interactions. He quit his prestigious job as a scientist because he couldn't handle the criticism his thesis was receiving, and he also avoided making any meaningful connections with others because he was afraid of being hurt. These are all things that Strat calls him out on, and she's completely right. But still, Strat is not exempt from criticism either. Her detached nature made her a force to be reckoned with, which is admirable, but it kept her from seeing the pain that her actions caused to others. I mean, she did send out an order that would speed up the rate of global warming after consulting with an environmental scientist, who, by the way, broke down crying after this. And most notably, she drugged the main character and forced him to go on a mission that they both knew he would not be returning from. Although, to be fair, and I'm not just saying this because she was one of my favorite characters, but from my perspective, it wasn't that Strat didn't care about how she was hurting others, but more so that she had trained herself to detach from their pain. We know that this is true because during her conversation with Grace about how he would be forced to board the ship, we're told that she looked pained by Grace's pleas to be spared. Despite how she may have acted, we're given hints that she really does care about him as a person. At first glance, the emotionless statement that she makes about how she'll be jailed after the project ends could be seen as a way of showing how cold and calculated she is. So much so to the point that she doesn't even care about the consequences of her own actions. In reality though, it could be seen as more of an acceptance of punishment. She's aware of all of the atrocities she's committing, and this statement is her coming to terms with and almost even condemning herself to receive the punishment that she thinks she deserves. I won't go into too much detail for a lack of time, but Strat is such a complex character, and I loved how, despite how emotionless she acted, there was always something deeper to her actions. It's kind of hard to say if the mission would have ever succeeded without somebody like Strat to make the difficult choices that could only be accomplished by looking at things through a pessimistic, glass half empty kind of outlook. Cold logic may have been a necessary tool, but it was ultimately Grace's kindness that took over in the end and saved humanity. I mean, just think about it. If Strat were in Grace's place, would she have saved Rocky after the Adrian incident? Or would she have focused on the mission instead? Would she have had the capacity and kindness to befriend a being who was completely different from her? Or would her tunnel vision for saving humanity get in the way? We've seen through the examples of both Strat and Grace how focusing too much on either your logical or your emotional side can have its drawbacks. So it may be best to have a good balance of both. But while I know that in the end a balance of the two is what's needed, the main takeaway that I got from this book was just how, I guess, beautiful empathy and human connection can be. It's not something that we often see celebrated in books, so it was really nice to see this often overlooked aspect be highlighted in a positive way. Yes, logic is very important, but that doesn't mean that we should look down or ignore on the other parts of ourselves that are led by what make us human at the end of the day. At its core, this book is fun and enjoyable. It makes you laugh in situations that you'd never think to, allowing you to see the positives in any situation. And above all else, it fills you with this sense of endless hope that, I don't know, I mean, I guess you just kind of need to be reminded of sometimes. If a random guy can manage to save humanity with the help of an alien rock spider, why can't you? Which reminds me, this is like such an extreme side tangent and like topic change, but I feel like I just need to mention it. Speaking of Rocky, I remember specifically the day after I read this book, I was like kind of an emotional mess because of how attached I was to this book. So anyway, I went to this bakery and I kid you not, I saw this bread that like vaguely looked like Rocky, and I'm not even joking, I had to force myself to hold back tears. Anyway, Project Hail Mary is a story that will stick with you long after you've read it. Once you get past the confusing scientific terms and learn to just smile and nod, you'll be immersed into a creative, witty story that you can get lost in for hours. One that shows you how beautiful life can be when you listen to the parts of yourself that you may have pushed away for so long. I wish that I could find the words to just truly emphasize how much this book means to me, how much it means to all of its readers, really. I was originally planning on making a much longer, detailed review that would have just been like 30 minutes of me frothing at the mouth over how much I love this book, but unfortunately my school workload had me in like a bit of a chokehold. So while I wasn't able to go super into depth, I at least wanted to focus on what it was about this book that made it so special to me. If you haven't checked out the book for yourself, I'd seriously encourage it. There is a movie coming out in like a couple of months, depending on when I can get this video out, but you can just tell that they put a lot of effort and love into the, into the production. So I'm really excited to watch it. But yeah, if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really appreciate you listening to me ramble for a couple of minutes. Stay hydrated, stay warm, and most importantly, make sure to give your friends a quick fist bump. There is nothing but the cold, deafening quiet of the outside, and the only thing illuminating the endless pitch black